Hi, I'm Hillary.
I'm Lark.
And I'm Jessica. And welcome to Hearsay, where we deep dive into the cultural moments that live rent-free in our heads and probably yours too. And today, we're going to live in a 90s kind of world and be glad we have our girls. We are talking about the sitcom Living Single. And a little later, I'm going to be talking to two of our incredible colleagues who also happen to be Living Single fans. We can share our hot takes about the show, but also talk about Living Single versus Friends, another sitcom, and what that debate about the two shows means for representation and pay transparency.
Yes. And now I just have the theme song stuck in my head.
Living
Single. Like the 90s show intros, like a real song, some like dramatic, there's like breakdancing in that one, like trying to be very New York, I feel like. And I think shows just don't have those anymore.
For those of you who don't know what Living Single is, it is a sitcom that was created by eerily Bowser, and it starred Queen Latifah. Just take a Queen Latifah.
Like a drum roll before.
Yeah, literally. Like that should alone
Starting
tell
lineup.
you how impactful and how amazing the show was. But Queen Latifah, Eric Alexander, Kim Coles, and Kim Fields. And it originally aired from 1993 to 1998. And it was a launch pad for a lot of those actresses and actors. And also kind of the starter for a lot of trends and tropes in shows, whether you know it or not.
Yeah.
It ended before I was born. So
That's,
when you said the
yourself.
years, I was ready to challenge you on which of those you saw.
How do you know?
Jessica.
Well, the whole thing
doing
is,
some research.
yeah, I got it. There's like the pinnacle shows, I think, that everyone argues for like a society, but especially as like a Black child.
Yeah.
My parents being like, you have to watch
Yeah.
this. So the show obviously ended over 25 years ago. And it has become more relevant in the past few years. Friends has also been around for just as long. And their stars have been clamping down on their legacies. It has become such a cultural institution, while the Living Single stars are kind of just doing whatever and being themselves and doing amazing things and have moved on. I mean, I watched it during the pandemic. I was living at my parents' house.
For the first time you watched it.
The first time I watched it. Like, I'd never even heard of it.
Wow.
But then obviously Mom was like, have you not seen this?
Right.
I'm like, the only way I would have heard of this was through you.
Yeah.
Right.
So what are we talking about?
Because I was not yet born when it was on.
Right.
It's a fair defense.
Yeah.
How have you not seen this? That is such
Come
like
on,
a parent. Like, how have you not seen? I'm like, you would have shown it to
it's
me.
your personal feeling as a parent. It's not mine.
It's not mine. And so I had like a routine like every morning. And during that time, I was in college. I'd get up, go for a run, come home, eat breakfast with my mom and my brother, and then Living Single would be on.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I started it.
It's always on. I feel like, and same with Friends. Like I remember Friends being on. It came on Nick at Night, like after the kids show, and I remember that was like you'd have to start brushing your teeth. Whatever time that came on, it was like, this is it.
Friends.
You get one episode of Friends, and then you need to be in bed. And so we lusted after it because it was this show we couldn't watch.
Night,
and it was like the adult
ooh.
show after. But I didn't watch either of the shows like sequentially for a long time. Like Living Single a couple years ago. I think probably around the same time as you did. I feel like that's when it went on Hulu or Max.
Yeah, it's on Hulu and it's on Max now too. Yeah.
And I watched it from start to finish and it was so good. I've still never watched Friends sequentially,
You
but
don't need to. It's okay.
yeah, I feel like I've seen probably like 50% of it.
Okay.
I mean, as a millennial, it's inescapable the amount of like Instagram captions I still see on a weekly basis of people announcing, engagements, babies, marriages, running a marathon, new jobs, the one where like bachelorette party t-shirts, you can't miss it.
I mean, I feel like I'm the problem. The reason people talk about Friends and they don't watch Living Single. Like I am maybe it's not
You're
my
not the problem.
fault,
No.
right? But I'm a poster child for what happened, which was I was like definitely alive to start while these aired and watched Friends. I watched Friends first, like kind of earnestly. How old? I was in high school, I guess, when it was on. So like I watched it, talked about it, liked it, turned on it. The whole journey you go on a show. There are parts that I adored. There's maybe a certain type A to Monica that really competitive.
Always my favorite.
My favorite episode is the one where they compete over the apartment. I'm already giving Friends too much airtime. But like, I forget which of you said like, let's talk about Living Single. I was like, had to confess that I'd never seen it, even though I knew about it.
Right.
I knew Queen Latifah was on it. So I watched it for the first time and was overcome by how much things that I had watched otherwise had ripped off. Living Single. Like I just couldn't. I know everyone said it, but it was like, oh, Sex and the City does not exist without the show. Like every archetype you can like map onto them perfectly, and it wasn't even subtle. And I felt even worse, I guess, like retroactively for not watching it. And the question is, why didn't I? And I think it has a lot to do with marketing, but I think there's built-in assumptions, right? Like Living Single wasn't marketed to me. But it could have been. I would have been into it. There's no difference, right, between the ages of the characters in relationship to me at that point. There's no reason for me to not watch it. I would have been into them, and I was now. Like, they're adorable. And I was already picking who I liked and who I was. Like, there was someone to imprint on somebody, and that didn't matter because it was a Black show. Like, I was still there for it. But they didn't. In some ways, I felt like I wasn't given the chance. It wasn't advertised to me, and I think that probably happened to a lot of people.
And I feel like, it's still not. Like, it's only on at my house because my dad constantly is watching BET. Like, it's like, it's not on where Friends is on,
Nick at Night.
Yeah.
When you said that, I mean,
like
it's
Living
only
Single
on
was never on.
and BET. Like, you would never see a rerun of it on Nick at Night, on USA, like on any other places where.
TBS or something. You know, like there's no.
Only Black channels rerun Black shows, even when they're not Black shows. And what even is a Black show?
Right.
When you really think about it, like, I don't know, when every time Black History Month and you turn on your streaming and it's like celebrating Black stories. Right. And it's like a slave movie.
Yes.
And then like and maybe like
Selma.
Insecure.
Like,
Insecure is amazing, obviously.
It was made with the Black audience in mind, but it was for everyone. You know, like Insecure is the same way. It's like if you know, you know, you're still gonna enjoy it no matter what. And you're like, it's still an incredible show.
Well, so the part that's interesting, right, is that Warner Brothers made both shows. And, that Warren Littlefield, who had NBC at the time, saw Living Single, saw it was successful. At the time, I think it was the highest rated show on Fox.
I think so.
So it was like doing well.
Yeah, it was doing so
certainly doing well
network,
on Fox.
Yeah.
Right. A smaller network than NBC at that point because the networks were all weird and different. And networks meant something then and don't mean anything now. But, like they saw Living Single's success and said, how can we recreate this? And, shrewdly made a show very similar, Friends, Apartment, post-college life, but made them all white. And marketed the hell out of the show, and it did great. And they made, more money than anyone ever in the history of the world.
Yeah.
Can't fact check that sentence, but they made so much.
I think it broke records.
No, it did for cast pay and
I think up until like Big Bang Theory. Do you have the receipts, Jessica?
But yeah, believe it or not, we do actually do research for the show.
Well, speak for yourself.
You
did,
so I'm reading this article, which we will put in the show notes. This is a quote from an article. So the terms are still being negotiated, but each star received between $2 and $4 million just to appear on the reunion.
They were definitely the highest paid. They all negotiated their contracts together and like got that like big renewal.
Yeah.
But the point was like Warner Brothers, who was behind it, decided that there was a cap on the potential for Living Single, and instead took that energy and made another show.
And then it's like, meanwhile, every season of Living Single, the budget was like $1 million a season.
Just like what each cast member is getting paid.
Yeah, and that's the budget for the whole season, it seems like, not even for the cast. Yeah. And it's like,
One, to think about the talent, too, of like you said, Queen Latifah, Kim Fields,
I know.
Eric
They're
Alexander,
so good.
Kim Cole, all of them were kind of household names now, and they make jokes in the show.
Guest stars.
Oh my God, I forgot about the guest stars. Nia Long, she was like season 1. Shows are not guest starring in the ways they used to, and I need
they don't
them
do
to bring
songs,
that back.
They don't do guest stars. Well, kind of Insecure kind of did that, like Ben Staples and what was that guy's? Amine.
Yeah, God, one of the best episodes.
It was so good. I'm from Philly.
It's one of those things where it's like, I almost wish I didn't know this. Like it makes me so sad to know that they knew that, the cast of Living Single knew that at the time and watched all of this happen, and it happened to them. I feel like is so disheartening. I'm glad to see it get its flowers though now. I feel like that is a benefit of streaming and TikTok and seeing younger people and even not so young people rediscover the show or discover it for the first time and like post about how much they love it and have people be able to experience that. And I hope that kind of helps not have such a disparity, but we still know the people that make the decisions, the networks, the producers, like the streaming services that are going to decide who gets funded and who doesn't, still is so fraught and so bad and usually pretty racist. Like what was it, Max, who just like cut a bunch of black shows or something?
Including Issa Rae's show. Yeah. And it's so disheartening. And it continues, right? Like we're talking about how back when Friends and Living Single came out over 20 years ago, the marketing was so different. And obviously it's like Friends is for everyone, but Living Single is just for Black people. And obviously there's certain things that you won't get unless you're Black. But you can still enjoy it no matter what, and you can learn. And
you'll never get it if you never watch it, though.
Right. Exactly. That's the whole thing. And so this kind of goes into, like, when Lark and I decided to rewatch it, and, like, I guess before Hillary watched it, like, when the Friends reboot was happening, and David Schwimmer was like, maybe there should be an all-Black Friends or an all-Asian Friends. And Erica Alexander, who plays Maxine Shaw, attorney at law. I love her. That's a
me too.
Conversation.
That was my obvious favorite character.
Yeah. She's so good.
So funny.
Yeah. She's like literally like, if I'm cackling, it's probably because of something that she said.
Her and Kyle's beef
Their enemies to lovers is the blueprint.
So good.
It's another thinly veiled attempt to deny your animalistic attraction towards me.
You right about the animal park, Fido.
But anyway, she like replied on Twitter and was like, hey, at David Schwimmer at Friends TV, are you seriously telling me you've never heard of hashtag Living Single? We invented the template. You're welcome, bro.
Ooh, so yes.
And she was like, yeah, the mentions afterwards. She's like, I was going on a flight. I turned on my phone right after that happened. And then when I got off, it was crazy.
Yeah.
And that's when she talked about like the reunion financial disparities. And she was like, it's unfortunate because the show he was in was not original. It was a knockoff. So there could never be an all-Black Friends because Friends was an all-white Living Single.
Yeah.
Is what she said in the article, which will also be in the show notes.
Yeah. It really was the knockoff. And I think a lot of the things that Living Single tackled, like they tackle discrimination, they tackle wage disparities, they tackle like hair conversations and like respectability politics. They tackle so many things that Friends never did and Dancer, like they all just magically had enough money to live in those giant
apartments. There's
even,
one
like,
good Friends episode where they even acknowledge the fact that they earn different salaries.
Yes,
when they go to dinner.
Yes,
when they can,
and they talk about splitting
Let's just
the
split
check.
Right. It's the one time, but the show existed in a bubble on purpose.
Yeah,
to be idealized.
Right.
Yeah, and Living Single, in my opinion, can still be idealized.
Yeah,
and it's still talking about money. It's still talking about dating. It's still talking about like
funny.
friendship. It's still hilarious, and it's honestly hilarious because of the vulnerability of it all. And again, it's like, it is part of real life is being able to be like, wow, I'm romanticizing my life. Like I'm listening to music, walking down the street, but you're still going home or you're hanging out with your friends and you're having really fun conversations, but you're also having really meaningful conversations. Like this just happened at work. I'm going through this thing, whether they're upfront about it or not, like working through things.
The relationships
together.
feel very grounded.
Yeah.
From even the bit that I saw, their friendship felt like, I mean, that's the ideal, right? To be able to have that much time with your friends. And I mean, it's funny that the Friends part of this is like much purer on the show, not called Friends, than the Friends show.
So there have been Black sitcoms since Living Single, like Girlfriends, which I still haven't watched, and Insecure.
So good.
All of which only having like a few seasons, but they've left impacts on different generations of Black women. And while Living Single sparked conversations while it was airing, it continues to spark conversations about the importance of representation in the media, trend-setting, trailblazing, and also the need for pay transparency, not just in Hollywood, but everywhere.
For everyone.
Even with The Color Purple coming out, the recent version of it, and the actors were talking about their conditions on set, like the differences in the different movies being produced on the same lot. And like the food and like the treatment and the budget. And so clearly it is time for us to really have a conversation about it. So I'm really excited that I get to talk to two of our amazing, incredible colleagues about this. And they're also Living Single fans. So I'm talking to Kiera and Galen. And hopefully we can share all of our hot takes just like we just did, but also talk about what the Living Single versus Friends debate means for representation and pay transparency.
Yeah, I can't wait to see their thoughts as two people that watched it live. You know, and the work they do. I'm so excited to hear what they have to say about it.
Yeah, me too. I'm so excited to be sat here with two of my wonderful colleagues who also are fellow living single fanatics.
Yes.
We have Kiara Pisante-Haunton, who is the Vice President of Campaigns and Communications. And we have Galen Burrows, who is the Director of Workplace Equality. Thank y'all so much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I've been so excited to talk to y'all about this.
I'm very excited to have this conversation.
So obviously, we gotta level. We gotta get down. Do y'all have a favorite character, favorite couple?
Well, Max is iconic.
Khadijah, I am Maxine Shaw, attorney at law. I lose weight. I lose patience. If you keep working my nerves, I may lose my mind, but I do not lose cases.
I mean, she's my favorite character of all time. But I'm like a Khadijah. But I want to be a Max. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Like her hair, the way she dressed, everything about her was, perfect. She was out here being beautiful and bold and in control and sassy.
And unapologetic.
I loved her.
As a little person watching the show, I was absolutely a Khadijah. I was in elementary school and middle school in the 90s. I would make up my own magazines, staple together or whatever, paper, construction paper in the house. And so obviously as the founder of a magazine and the editor-in-chief of a magazine, Khadijah to me was just everything. Her energy, like you said, sass, which she obviously shared, I think, with Max. Just she was a boss, right?
Yeah.
And I just loved that. And I loved that for us to have on TV in the 90s every week. I loved it.
I feel like I just realized when I was talking and saying that Max was unapologetic, all of them were.
Yeah, all of them
were.
Yeah.
And Sinclair's silliness.
Yes.
Even Sinclair,
Yes.
All of their silliness and unseriousness. Yeah. They were standing on business. They were not, they were truly themselves.
Yes.
Which is part of what made their characters butt heads a lot, is because they were so rooted in their personalities and their beliefs. And what kind of message and comfort that brings to Black people to see people who are not compromising their identities in any way, whether it's just in casual conversations or in the workplace with their friends, whatever.
I mean, for me, that entire era of television was one to behold. I don't know if we'll ever get to experience that again, but I think, I look at in the early 90s, right? So the end of A Different World rolled directly into Martin, which premiered the year before Living Single, rolled directly into Living Single. We had Family Matters. We had Hanging with Mr. Cooper. There were so many of those shows that we had that showed various relationship dynamics and Black folks in various roles, whether it was as high school principals, whether it was as the editor-in-chief of a magazine, as lawyers, as financiers, working at firms like Kyle did. I mean, or even as handymen, right? Overton, whatever it was. But folks who were educated and who were hardworking, but also who were funny and who loved their friends and just did regular things, doing living regular life. That was also, I think, really profound about that era in television. And I also think just historically, as coming out of the 80s, coming out of, the very intensive period around just the crack epidemic and all those things, I think we really needed that. In television, we needed to see, this is who we are, right? Yeah. And we can be all these different things.
So what was it like for both of you growing up, watching it as it was airing? And what do you remember feeling about watching it, whether it was you and also your friends and family?
I mean, this was decades ago. So what was I feeling? I mean, the thing about it is that it was just normal TV. It wasn't like I was watching something special, or I didn't appreciate it as something special because I was, I don't know.
This is TV.
Yeah, 12, 13 or whatever, right? This is just what I was supposed to watch. It's funny because you mentioned A Different World. And I remember thinking that HBCUs weren't real. That was just what happened on TV. That was some cool special place. Right? And then for me, wanting to be Max. And so it's not surprising that I became a lawyer. But seeing someone who could say those things was very, she always had a comeback.
You are a virus with braids.
And you're a leprechaun with a weave.
Right? And like, I always felt like I didn't have those comebacks, right? Like, it would be like 20 minutes later. I'm like, I should have said that.
Yeah.
And I loved it. She just embodied her space. She took up the space.
Yes.
And I loved that.
It's so interesting the point that you made about not thinking HBCUs were real coming out of watching Different World, because we were coming out of, I think, this era of like a little bit more of like an assimilationist kind of like era where folks were like, oh no, we want to prove ourselves at, these IVs or these PWIs or whatever. And then like these shows kind of coincided with the time where our top students were like, actually, no, I'm going to go to Fisk. I'm going to go to Xavier. I'm going to go to, FAM or whatever. So that's one thing that I remember stuck out to me just watching the show. I think for me, the show, it's just like warmth. It's like home because I'm not sure how your family or your house did it, but we watched that show every week together. Like that was like, Living Single is about to be on. Y'all, what are y'all doing? And we watched it together.
I can imagine like how empowering it must be.
And I think even for me, it being comfort and it being home, it still is like a smart show and incredibly funny and tackled so many issues that people are still dealing with and talking about now, as you know, Caitlin, but did it in a way that really made you like think. Like I know one of the big issues that the show often addressed and dealt with was this question of professionalism and this question of like how you show up.
I've come to realize that this firm values the superficial over the substantial. But I cannot violate my personal integrity. My hair is not just for fashion. It's part of my heritage. It is a statement of pride.
I know we have a lot of conversations about that now, and there's legislation about our hair and all of this, but that was a big topic on this show because you had a lawyer, right? You had the CEO of a magazine, and to be clear, to about unapologetic, the magazine was Flavor, right?
Yeah.
That was the name of the magazine was Flavor, and the entire newsroom was black, and right, and then Regine and her. Okay, so what? Speaking of like professionals and how we show up, and how funny it was just being in their house. One of the devices of the show that I love was that a lot of us probably can resonate with. Some woman in our life was Regine and her many wigs, and like how she named her wigs, or she would very proudly show up every day or come down the steps in a different wig every time, and that was a running joke and trope on the show. Was Khadijah would be like, "Girl, what is on your head? What is this today? Who is this? Who are you today?" And again, though, right, about professionalism, how her hair looked, whether it was a short one or a long one, whether it was a ponytail or braids, whatever. That was another thing to me, like just brilliant about the show, because there were other black shows, but they were not tackling I think the issue quite like that, about how we show up in the workplace.
And like even watching it in the rewatch, I almost always skip this episode, unfortunately, when the Flavor staff tries to unionize.
Yes.
Khadijah. So I'm like, not her.
Not her not having health insurance for her employees.
Not her mistreating her workers.
Oh my God.
But it does touch, like, I'm like, we need to be watching this again.
Yeah. No, really.
Especially in like the media space.
Yeah.
And talking about the working conditions of the fictional people on the show and then transitioning into the real actors.
God.
So that's kind of, the connection is talking about now, 20-something years later, after the show already came out, talking about how not only was Friends basically a ripoff of Living Single, but the pay disparities between the two shows, not even just because of airtime, but because of
racism?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Let's make sure we were going to say that.
Yes. I was like, we know, but yes, racism.
I remember reading something like the cast members of Friends, by the time they got to like, I don't know, season 3 or 4, whatever, were making like $1 million an episode. And that always stuck out to me. One, as a young person, I was like, it's like Monopoly money. I was like, what's $1 million? Like, that's a lot of money. And it was $1 million, like $90s, right? It was a lot of money. But I was very obsessed with that. I remember that number because this was also the era when like ER had come out and George Clooney was out and they were all, that was a big deal, right? Like he was getting $1 million an episode. Like that was like the magic number in television.
To
like
aim for.
Yeah, if you're making $1 million an episode, you are like, whatever, A-list. You are the top tier. And I always remember, noticeably absent from those conversations would be every show that I watched, right? Martin, Living Single. But that always stuck out to me as something that was so glaring, like how anyone could not see. And then as a person of like adulthood and sound mind, like realizing that Warner Brothers produced both of these shows.
Yes.
So not only were these shows competing at the exact same, day of the week and airtime, literally, they were shot like on the same lot. Yeah. So you have, right, like the white cast of the show, again, eventually making $1 million an episode, coming in, right, with their whatever they had, right? Their glam, their food, their assistants. And like on the other side of the lot or whatever is the Black show, where everyone is just like, yeah, happy to have a gig and happy to be employed and doing this really powerful thing, but like not being fairly compensated.
And marketed.
Or marketed.
That's right.
At all. And that just used to drive me crazy.
The other part of that, the story about how they got the $1 million an episode, right, is that they got together and they organized and they asked for it together and, and it was this like story of triumph. But that is not extended to, right? Like, if the cast of Living Single got together and organized and asked, they would have been told,
be grateful.
You're right. Be grateful.
Well, actually, that is how the Kyle Barker, I don't know if you remember this season, that's how the Kyle Barker character or T.C. Carson left the show.
What?
Because he went to Warner Brothers and was like, why are we not being paid? Or even getting promo or, like whatever it is, right? The morning shows, the night shows. Why are we not getting that same? And they were like, well, you can kick rocks.
Yeah. Galen, as the director of Workplace Equality.
Yes.
How would you put this conversation in the context of your work?
Well, so many of the issues that they talked about on the show still show up, right? So you talked about unionizing and organizing and, organizing for better pay, the real actors, right? And, that shows up all the time in my work, right? Unions being a better gig for women, in particular for Black women, right? This idea of not having people see your worth and what you deserve, right? That continues. That's a running theme, right? That's why we see such stark pay gaps for Black women, right? Yeah. So, the pay gap for women overall, for women who work full-time year-round is around 84 cents. Black women working full-time year-round, their pay gap is much higher. It's less than 70 cents, right? If you're working full-time in comparison to a white man, right? And so I remember the Twitter beef between Erica Alexander and David Schwartz, right? But that still shows up, right? Like that is still what we're dealing with. And it's not because, Black women aren't out there in the labor force. Historically, we've been, one of the largest participators in terms of demographics in the labor force. It's that the work that we perform isn't valued. And I don't like it when people talk about Black women being overrepresented in low-paid jobs. Yes, it's true. But those jobs shouldn't be low-paid. Those are the jobs that make us able to live our lives, right? And they're low-paid in part because of the people who do it.
Yep.
So it's just a constant story of the labor of Black women being exploited. And also, like, the fragility. The fragility of our economic existence. I remember an episode where Max gets suspended from her job.
Yeah.
Right? The fragility of, we don't have the same kinds of cushions. So if we get it, right? Right? The fear, the threat of retaliation or losing your job or when you don't have things to fall back on, right? And more likely than not, if you're a Black mom, you are the sole or primary breadwinner in your family. The impact reverberates for Black women, for their families, for themselves, for their communities.
You referenced the Twitter beef, and we've kind of talked about this, but how does this highlight the importance of pay transparency?
It's a lot easier to take advantage of people when they don't know how much they should be getting paid. Right? We all want to be paid fairly. But if you don't know what you should be getting,
right?
You can be taken advantage of. You can lowball yourself. And this idea where we talked about how people are made to feel like they should be grateful for what they have.
Mm-hmm.
That's internalized a little bit too, right? And so I think that pay transparency is part of getting to pay equality. But also, we're seeing legislation meant to level the playing field. So the legislation that I'm talking about, or the laws that I'm talking about, that ban salary history, consideration of salary history to set pay, that's really about leveling the playing field and not having, your past pay gap or the past disparity or the past discrimination follow you from job to job. And so we're seeing those two in particular as things that are common sense. There's a lot more that can be done in Congress to strengthen equal pay laws, to increase damages, to make it easier for people to sue, to make sure that people aren't retaliated against for talking about their pay
Wage
at
theft.
work, wage theft, raising the minimum wage.
Oh my God.
Right? Making sure that we're investing.
Our national shame.
Right. We're investing in jobs that are open to everybody, that we actually do have equal opportunity, so that we're not sort of perpetuating occupational segregation that has pushed Black women into certain kinds of jobs, that we think about how we value those jobs and that we actually spend the money to resource those jobs, childcare jobs, right? Home care. These are valuable things, but we want people to do it for pennies. But all of these things take time because change is hard. There are always going to be people who are going to push back and resist. But, we get one policy win after another, and soon they add up to real change.
Period.
What she said.
These conversations about the pay gap between these two shows, and also in almost all the shows, is happening 10, 20 years after the fact. Do you think we've seen a shift in demands for these conversations since the 90s?
I mean, I do. But then again, I talk about equal pay all the time. But I do think that it's part of the cultural conversation now, a little bit more. A lot more probably than it was in the 90s. I never heard my mom talking about pay equity, right? I mean, she talked about a lot of stuff, but that wasn't one of them, right? And so I do think that there's much more emphasis now on understanding that women of color in particular face different obstacles at work than white women. I mean, I think that there are people now who are looking at it from a broader economic perspective. It's not just a women's issue, but it's about economic security for families and for communities. I really think that we don't talk about the community piece enough because Black people invest in their communities. And so if you don't have that money to invest, it's not just you're not investing in yourself, but you also don't have the capacity to invest in your community by opening businesses, by, caring for other people. It's just the informal economy, also suffers. Real. And so and I think that maybe it's more true for immigrant communities, Black communities, communities of color. But we don't talk about that enough.
No. Why do y'all think that living single is an important piece of media, not just for Black people to consume, but also non-Black people?
I need a minute.
Because clearly, talking to my mom, talking with Lark, and talking to y'all, living single was marketed as the Black Friends, even before Friends was Friends. And even now, it was for Black people, for Black folks, so this Friends is for everybody. And in theory. But then I'm watching Friends and I'm I can't relate to these people at all.
One is just so we're clear, if Barack Obama is your only reference for Black people doing well, and there are a lot of people who for whom that is the marker of, this is when they got right? No, Black people were thriving long before that. And so if for anything that you need reference, I think that is why. But beyond that, I think it's anthropological. It's a very what we were saying, what we were wearing, how we were wearing our hair, the doobie, Olive Racine's wigs, right? The locks or whatever. like a time capsule of kind of like this is like what life was like. If you had to describe what was like 90s culture, it's like that to me. Like the 5 seasons of that show is like it is that. And that is why I think everyone should watch it, because you should know like what was happening before, you know, you were paying attention or you got here. That's my answer. What do you think?
Well,
she's like slightly different.
No, I do think it's important for everybody to watch these shows, right? For all the reasons that you just said. But there's also a part of me that's like, but this show is for us.
I guess my assertion, or the reason I'm asking this question, is like I feel like you can't say, "Oh, I love sitcoms," and you haven't watched Living Single. Like I think if you're an active pursuer of watching TV, like watching media, like if someone doesn't watch TV, I'm not going to say the first, and they're white. The first thing is I'm going to say is not going to say watch Living Single. But if you are an active media consumer,
and it's like you haven't seen Living Single. It's like what are you consuming?
Exactly.
To your point, if you are a consumer of media, if you're a consumer of sitcoms, you have seen Living Single because it is, right, a critical part of like media history and legacy, and like was the influencer for all the shows that came after. So if you haven't seen it, like you haven't really seen anything.
And going off of that, you're saying, it is everything. It is a culmination of our culture. So what do you think needs to happen for Black women and Black people to get the credit and the money that they deserve for all that we have contributed to culture and the economy and the world?
Girl, if we have the answer.
I'm like, really?
I said, what do you think? What do you think? Like, where do we start? What do y'all, when y'all are having these conversations?
The challenge, I think, in what's happening right now in the media landscape, as you are well aware, is, right, you have very few companies and a very few very rich people buying up everything. And so independent media is very scarce and very few and far in between. And what was once Black-owned media is not even Black-owned anymore. And like, right, there's so many different layers there.
I still feel like whenever Black people are doing something that's Black, right? It's about, right?
You always said black.
It's like people are taking a chance on us. But I'm like, we are running pop culture.
Period. Like, that's it.
Right.
Yeah.
So the mindset is really weird.
What does Mama say? They want all of our rhythm and none of our blues, okay? Like, everybody wants to be Black until it's time to be Black.
Thank y'all so much for being here.
This was great. I'm going to go home and watch some more Living Single.
Let me go queue up my Hulu as soon as I get in the house.
Hearsay is a Wonder Media Network production in partnership with the National Women's Law Center. It is hosted and produced by Jessica Baskerville, Lark Lewis, and Hillary Woodward. Our producers are Adesua Agbenile, Grace Lynch, and Taylor Williamson. Jenny Kaplan is our executive producer, and Maddie Foley is our editor. Production assistance by Lucy Jones and show art by Andrea Sumner.
Before I answer your question, can we just park there for a moment? Were you into Friends? Just honestly, you don't have to be.
Here's what I'll tell you.
Okay, because that's just what I want to know.
Friends is always on television.
Always.
It is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can't avoid it.
I don't understand why, though.
It's like I know more about Friends than I want to. It's like how I know so much about Kim Kardashian's life.
No, that's a... Yes, that's what it is.